The move squarely puts the Cowboys as a playoff contending football team this coming season. I anticipate the Cowboys to be better than other people. And a couple months ago, Greeny, it was the Cowboys could be a playoff contender if two things happen. Number one, that Dak Prescott has to stay healthy. That hasn't been the case recently. And then two, they got to get a number two guy opposite CeeDee Lamb. George Pickens, in the chaos of the quarterback situation at Pittsburgh, averages like 15 yards a catch. So we're talking about adding that to a wide receiver opposite CeeDee Lamb that is going to get you about 100, 110 catches a season and push 1,500 plus yards. George Pickens, contract year, yes, he's not a perfect type of player, but his ability to go down the field and make plays with an offensive line that I think is going to be one of the better ones in the NFL to back into the season, this squarely puts the Cowboys back into the we are a playoff contending football team.
Are you serious, Dan Orlovsky? Have you not paid attention to Jerry Jones? If you have, then you would realize that the George Pickens trade should not get you all that excited. This is Sports Guy talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Dan Orlovsky hyping up the George Pickens trade for the Cowboys. In fact, there is now chatter about the Cowboys having an elite offense with the acquisition of George Pickens. Remember, George Pickens will now get to play with Dak Prescott as his quarterback on the Cowboys. Before I say anything else, though, I want to present you guys with a topic question. So, here it is. Will George Pickens prove to be an effective wide receiver too for the Cowboys? I'm going to say no to this question. This is not me doubting on George Pickens, the football player. This is more so doubting George Pickens, the personality. We know that George Pickens has a lot of crash-out moments. George Pickens is the definition of a diva wide receiver. And you guys really think George Pickens is going to be on his best behavior? I don't believe that will be the case at all. There is nothing that indicates George Pickens is going to improve his behavior on the Dallas Cowboys. I know it sounds like I'm focusing a lot on his behavior, but behavior is everything in NFL locker room. When you're trying to establish culture, you need to have guys in the locker room that are all in at all times. George Pickens does not do that whatsoever. Here's also the other issue I have with George Pickens as well. George Pickens does not show up in big games. You guys remember how he performed in Week 18 against the Cincinnati Bengals, where he was basically held to one catch and he did nothing but drop passes and refused to get open all game long. Whenever I think about George Pickens, that's the first thing that comes in my mind. I know George Pickens has plenty of moments where he makes amazing catches, but there are also other moments where you look at George Pickens and you ask yourself, is George Pickens even interested in playing football, or is he interested in starting out fights? How is that going to improve on the Dallas Cowboys? The Dallas Cowboys love getting attention. George Pickens loves getting attention, and obviously you got a strong personality and a weak locker room culture, which means there's going to be a lot of clashes going on. I expect George Pickens to have plenty of crash out moments on the Dallas Cowboys. I don't really think his behavior is going to improve all that much. That being said, though, if George Pickens does improve his behavior, then I could possibly see this being a solid addition for the Dallas Cowboys, although it's not nearly as effective as what the mainstream media wants you to believe. George Pickens has 1 year left remaining on his deal. George Pickens is going to want a new deal this upcoming offseason. George Pickens already rejected a $120 million contract, which tells me George Pickens wants to get paid big time money. However, is George Pickens actually worth that money? I wouldn't pay George Pickens that money if I was Jerry Jones, but if Jerry Jones goes ahead and pays George Pickens that kind of money, that would be a huge mistake on the part of Jerry Jones. But hey, I'm not the general manager in Dallas. I'll let Jerry Jones do his thing because he's the general manager in the first place. I also want to show you guys this clip of Marcus Spears getting hyped up about the addition of George Pickens. Obviously, he's a Cowboys fan because he used to play for them, and he's going to go ahead and promote the Cowboys whenever he has an opportunity to do so. This should be surprising to no one. Roll the film.
The culture is going to matter.
Yeah.
And the culture is the players he's playing with. But on the field, it takes pressure off. Like, we've talked about this number 2 wide receiver position ad nauseum for the Dallas Cowboys, and they've been trying to fill in gaps and fill in roles and all of that stuff. I thought Michael Gallup back in a few years ago was trending towards being that guy. But what it does is it opens up this offense. Brian Schottenheimer talked about when he got the job that he wanted to become a more shifts in motion. He wanted to kind of innovate this offense a little bit and update it. And what you see now, especially look no further than your Philadelphia Eagles, Kev, when you have two real threats that are on the field, it makes defenses play you differently. And you win before the actual snap. So that's what I'm thinking. The excitement comes from that. Matchup problems. Who do we leave one-on-one when we double CeeDee Lamb? We have a guy that we know can win on the outside. Everything revolving around this George Pickens trade is about his availability, and is he going to bring a maturity that's needed in order to stay on the field and be available for games. If he does that, this offense is going to be a problem with those two guys on the outside.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man. That nigga's tripping.
Good job to Marcus Spears for pointing out that George Pickens could create issues in the locker room for the Dallas Cowboys. However, I don't like the fact that Marcus Spears de-emphasized the fact that George Pickens could cause the Cowboys locker room to be worse. It's a lot bigger of a deal than what the mainstream media is making it out to be. We know that George Pickens couldn't last in Pittsburgh because he couldn't get along with Mike Tomlin. If a guy like George Pickens couldn't last more than 3 seasons in Mike Tomlin's locker room, what makes you think George Pickens is going to all of a sudden change his behavior? George Pickens is a decent receiver, don't get me wrong, but he's not nearly as good as what he thinks he is. George Pickens has the mentality of a Terrell Owens type of ball player, but in reality, his talent level probably matches more of a Deontay Johnson. Speaking of Deontay Johnson, he was another former Steelers wide receiver that had multiple crash-out moments. He ends up getting traded, and then his career fell off a cliff. This is going to be no different in the case of George Pickens. George Pickens was a pretty decent receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know some George Pickens fanboys, they're going to tell me he didn't have a quarterback. That's why he didn't put up better stats. But I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily the case. If George Pickens was truly that guy, he would have showed up in big games. When you think about big games with George Pickens, what do you think of? You can't name any good big games that George Pickens has been a part of, because George Pickens has not been a consistently good player. George Pickens is a solid wide receiver too, which again, that's going to be his role in the Cowboys. However, he's not going to have the infrastructure of the Steelers locker room. He's going to be playing alongside CeeDee Lamb, yes, but CeeDee Lamb is going to be commanding 10 to 15 targets a game, and the Cowboys are probably going to run the football a lot because they got Brian Schottenheimer, who's known to be a run-first type of head coach. So how many targets does that leave George Pickens? It's not exactly like George Pickens is primed for a breakout year on the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, if George Pickens ended up struggling in Dallas, I would not be surprised whatsoever. Are we sure the Cowboys are even a playoff contender with the acquisition of George Pickens? I don't personally consider the Cowboys to be playoff contenders. I believe the Commanders are better than them. I believe the Eagles are better than the Cowboys. I believe the Rams are better than the Cowboys. I believe the Bucks are better than the Cowboys. I believe the Vikings are better than the Cowboys. I believe the Packers are better than the Cowboys. I believe the Lions are better than the Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys are not a playoff team. They might be a fringe playoff team, but it's not exactly like the Dallas Cowboys are going to be major contenders for the playoffs. They haven't been Super Bowl contenders in 29 years. It's not going to change this year for Dallas. George Pickens is not going to have a good ending with the Cowboys. I can already see it ending with multiple crash-out moments, and George Pickens is going to end up underachieving on the Dallas Cowboys, just like almost every diva receiver on the Cowboys ends up doing. That's the simple truth. So that is why George Pickens will not prove to be an effective wide receiver 2 on the Cowboys, as George Pickens' behavioral issues will ultimately derail his NFL career. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking, like the video, and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That will be for the @DustinNashTran Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram @DustinNashTran, and that's Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter @DustinNashTran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video, comment down below, check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.